At my wedding, surrounded by hundreds of people, my grandfather secretly handed me an old, yellowed bank passbook. Before I could even open it, my dad snatched it from my hands. He held it up to the microphone, his voice echoing across the ballroom. Trash belongs with trash. He didn't just mock it. He dropped the book straight into a bucket of melting ice and champagne. As the crowd erupted into laughter, I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I plunged my bare hand into the freezing water, ruined my expensive suit sleeve to save those soaking wet pages, and walked out of the hall without looking back. 3 days later, I went to the bank anyway. The teller typed the account number in, and all the color instantly drained from her face. She looked up at me, terrified. "Sir, please wait here. Do not leave. Before I tell you about the dramatic outcome and what was actually hiding inside those ruined pages, let me know where you are watching from in the comments." I can still feel the freezing water on my skin. That moment at my wedding wasn't just an isolated incident of cruelty. It was the defining summary of my entire existence within the Mercer family. My name is Matthew. I am 32 years old, and I work as an emergency room nurse. I spend my days running between trauma bays, trying to save lives, constantly covered in sweat and other people's blood. It is an exhausting, demanding job, and my salary barely covers my rent in the city, but it is honest work. However, in my family's eyes, I am nothing. I am the invisible son, the disappointment, the one who didn't go into corporate finance or aggressive real estate acquisitions like my father, David, and my older brother, Connor. My wedding was supposed to be a small, quiet affair. My wife, Emily, and I just wanted a simple dinner with our closest friends. But my father wouldn't allow that. David Mercer never missed an opportunity to display his wealth and his supposed power. He hijacked the entire event, turning it into a massive networking gala for his investors, his golf buddies, and local politicians. Emily and I felt like props in his grand theatrical production. We were shoved into a corner while David held court at the center table, laughing loudly, smoking expensive cigars, and bragging about his latest real estate conquest. Grandpa Samuel was the only person from my side of the family who actually cared that I was getting married. He was a quiet, observant man who had built a modest life running a hardware store decades ago. He always smelled like sawdust and peppermint. During the reception, while David was making another loud toast about his own success, Grandpa Samuel pulled me aside near the back exits. His hands were shaking as he reached into the inner pocket of his worn tweed jacket. He pulled out a small, dark blue booklet. The edges were frayed, and the gold lettering on the front was completely faded. "Take this, Matthew," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I've been holding on to it for a very long time. It is for you. Only for you." I reached out to take it, but before my fingers could grasp the worn cover, a large, manicured hand shot past my shoulder and snatched the book away. It was David. He had noticed Grandpa Samuel pulling me aside and, like a shark smelling blood in the water, he had come over to investigate. David hated Grandpa Samuel. He hated him because Samuel saw right through the expensive suits and the arrogant bluster. "What is this?" David sneered, flipping the passbook open. "A savings account from the Stone Age? What's in here, old man? Enough to buy a sandwich? Give it back, David," Grandpa Samuel said firmly, though he coughed weakly. "It is none of your business." David laughed. It was a cruel, booming sound that made several guests turn their heads. "Oh, please, you're embarrassing yourself. You want to give the boy a wedding gift? I just paid $100,000 for this party. That is a gift." He waved the passbook in the air, catching the attention of his investor friends standing near the bar. "Look at this. The old man is handing out ancient bank books. Probably has $5.50 in it." The sycophants at the bar chuckled. Connor, my older brother, walked over with a glass of scotch in his hand, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Careful, Dad. That paper looks like it has a disease." "Trash," David said loudly, making sure his voice carried over the music. He looked dead into my eyes, ensuring I felt the full weight of his contempt. "Trash belongs with trash." He held the passbook over a large silver bucket filled with ice and champagne bottles. And he dropped it. I watched the little blue book hit the ice and slide down into the freezing water. The crowd actually laughed. My own father had just publicly humiliated my grandfather and me, and his friends thought it was a hilarious joke. Something snapped inside me, but it wasn't a loud, explosive snap. It was a cold, quiet realization. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a punch. I calmly walked over to the silver bucket. I rolled up the sleeve of my rented tuxedo jacket, plunged my arm deep into the freezing, slushy water, and dug around the ice cubes and glass bottles until my fingers found the soggy, heavy booklet. I pulled it out. The water dripped onto the marble floor. I looked at David. His smile faltered just a fraction of an inch. I didn't say a single word to him. I turned to Emily, who was watching with tears in her eyes, squeezed her hand and said, "We are leaving." And we did. We walked right out the front doors of the country club, leaving the music and the laughter behind. I held the wet passbook tightly against my chest all the way to the car. I didn't know what was inside it. I didn't care. It was a gift from the only man who had ever truly loved me, and I was not going to let David destroy it. I spent the entire wedding night in our small apartment kitchen, carefully separating the damp pages with a pair of tweezers and laying them flat on paper towels to dry. The ink was heavily smudged, the numbers blurred into blue streaks. It looked like a piece of garbage, but I placed it carefully into a plastic Ziploc bag. I was determined to figure out what it was. 3 days later, I drove into downtown Boston. The sky was overcast, a heavy gray matching the exhaustion I felt in my bones. I had just come off a brutal 14-hour shift at the hospital. We had a massive trauma incident, a multi-car pileup on the interstate. I spent the entire night covered in sweat, keeping patients stabilized, dealing with frantic families in the waiting room. My feet ached, my back was stiff, and my mind was clouded with fatigue. I hadn't slept, but I couldn't rest. The Ziploc bag sitting on the passenger seat of my old, beat-up Honda Civic demanded my attention. I parked 3 blocks away from the First National Bank to avoid the exorbitant parking fees. I walked through the financial district, pulling my cheap, thin jacket tighter around my shoulders against the biting autumn wind. Everyone around me was moving with purpose, dressed in sharp suits and carrying leather briefcases. They looked like they belonged. I looked like a guy who had just rolled out of a hospital break room. The bank lobby was intimidating. It was a massive cavern of polished white marble, brass fixtures, and vaulted ceilings. The air inside felt heavy and hushed, like a museum. The sound of my worn sneakers squeaking on the pristine floor seemed unnaturally loud. I joined the short line of customers. When it was my turn, I walked up to the counter. Behind the thick bulletproof glass sat a young teller. Her name tag read Chloe. She couldn't have been older than 22. She looked at me, taking in my tired eyes, my messy hair, and my faded jacket. Her customer service smile was polite, but incredibly thin. "How can I help you today, sir?" she asked, her voice carrying a practiced, professional distance. "I need to check the status of this account," I said. My voice sounded rough from lack of sleep. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the Ziploc bag, and slid it under the metal partition. Chloe picked up the bag using only her thumb and index finger, her nose crinkling slightly as if she were handling a dead insect. She looked through the plastic at the dried, wrinkled, water-stained passbook. The cover was warped, and the pages were stiff and crusty. It looked exactly like what my father had called it. "Trash." "Sir, this is a very old ledger," she said, sounding slightly annoyed. "We haven't used these in decades. Are you sure you don't have a debit card or an account number I can look up?" "The account number is printed on the inside of the front cover," I said patiently. "Can you please just run the numbers?" She sighed, a tiny huff of breath that told me I was wasting her valuable time. She slipped the book out of the bag, careful not to smudge her hands, and opened the stiff cover. She squinted at the faded, water-damaged ink. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. She typed in the sequence of numbers slowly. I stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, I fully expected her to tell me the account had been closed in 1995, or that it had a balance of $12. I was prepared to take the book back, thank her for her time, and go home to sleep. Chloe hit the enter key. I watched her face. First, her eyes widened. Then her lips parted slightly. The polite, thin smile completely vanished. She leaned closer to her monitor, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. She pressed a key to refresh the page. She blinked rapidly once, twice. When she finally looked up at me, the color had completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just witnessed a ghost walk through the bank lobby. "Sir?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling so badly I could barely hear her through the glass. "Sir, please wait here. Do not leave. Please, do not move." She didn't press the silent alarm button under the desk, but her reaction was so visceral that my heart started hammering against my ribs. Did David report the book stolen? Was the account tied to some sort of criminal activity? I suddenly felt incredibly exposed standing in the middle of that vast marble lobby. Chloe practically jumped out of her chair. She didn't even lock her computer terminal. She turned and practically sprinted toward a heavy mahogany door at the back of the teller area. I stood there, frozen. A security guard standing near the entrance shifted his posture, resting his hand near his utility belt, watching me with sudden interest. The minutes stretched out into an eternity. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. I was just a tired nurse holding a piece of wet cardboard. Why was everyone acting like I had brought a bomb into the building? Suddenly, the mahogany door swung open. Chloe stepped out, looking even more pale than before. Behind her were two men. One was an older gentleman with silver hair, wearing a sharp navy suit, the branch manager. But it was the man behind him that caught my attention. He was younger, perhaps in his late 40s, wearing a charcoal bespoke suit that screamed old money. He carried himself with an air of absolute authority. They didn't walk towards me. They hurried. The security guard tensed, but the man in the charcoal suit waved him off with a quick flick of his wrist. They approached my window. The man in the charcoal suit looked right past my cheap jacket and my exhausted face. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen directed at me in my entire life. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect. It bordered on reverence. "Mr. Mercer?" the man asked, his voice smooth and incredibly polite. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is Julian. I am the regional director for wealth management," he said. He didn't speak through the glass partition. He gestured toward a discreet, frosted glass door to the side of the teller counters. "Please, Mr. Mercer, come with us. We have been waiting for this account to be claimed for a very long time. It is an honor to finally meet you." I followed Julian and the branch manager through the frosted glass door, leaving the main lobby behind. The atmosphere shifted immediately. We walked down a long, quiet hallway lined with dark wood paneling and thick, plush carpeting that absorbed every sound. It smelled of lemon polish and old paper. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept glancing at the Ziploc bag Julian was now holding as if it were a fragile historical artifact. We stopped in front of a heavy, solid steel door. The branch manager typed a code into a keypad, inserted a physical key, and turned a heavy wheel. The door clicked and swung open with a deep, metallic groan. It was a private viewing room inside the bank's main vault. The room was small, windowless, and contained only a polished mahogany table and 4 heavy leather chairs. "Please have a seat, Mr. Mercer," Julian said, gesturing to the chair at the head of the table. I sat down. The leather creaked under my weight. I felt completely out of place. I was a guy who ate stale hospital sandwiches over a trash can at 3 in the morning. I didn't belong in a room designed for people who owned yachts. "Can someone please explain what is going on?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the dead acoustics of the vault. "My grandfather gave me that passbook a few days ago. My father threw it in a bucket of water. I just wanted to see if the account was still active." Julian placed the Ziploc bag carefully in the center of the table. He didn't laugh. He didn't sneer. He looked at the ruined book with immense gravity. "Mr. Mercer, your grandfather, Samuel, Did not just open a standard savings account, Julian began, his tone measured and precise. In 1982, long before you were even born, he established a very specific financial instrument known as a Totten Trust. It is an account in trust for a designated beneficiary. You are that sole beneficiary. I nodded slowly, trying to process the legal jargon. Okay, so he left me some money. He left you a legacy, sir. The branch manager interjected. His voice hushed. Julian pulled a thick, leather-bound file folder from a shelf on the wall and laid it on the table. He opened it, revealing pages of complex financial statements and historical stock tickers. Your grandfather was an exceptionally astute man. He wasn't a Wall Street trader, but he possessed a rare kind of foresight. The initial deposit in this trust was relatively modest. However, he used it to purchase early shares in two emerging technology companies in the 1980s. Julian tapped his pen on the document. Apple and Microsoft. I stared at him. The words hung in the air. He never touched the principal. He never withdrew a single dividend, Julian continued. He instructed the bank to automatically reinvest every single penny back into the portfolio. He let it sit. He let it compound. Through market crashes, through dot-com bubbles, through recessions. The account has remained completely untouched and actively managed by our trust department according to his strict, irrevocable instructions for over 40 years. My mouth felt dry. I thought about Grandpa Samuel, working in his dusty hardware store, driving the same beat-up pickup truck for 20 years. I thought about David mocking him, calling him a failure, a small-town loser. All those years, Samuel had been quietly building an empire in the shadows. How much? I asked. The question barely made it past my lips. Julian turned the final page of the summary document and slid it across the polished mahogany table toward me. He didn't say the number out loud immediately. He let me look at it. I stared at the black ink printed on the crisp white paper. I read the numbers. Then I closed my eyes, opened them and read them again. The line labeled current market value, legally payable upon death of grantor, was highlighted. $12,400,000. $12,400,000. The funds are entirely liquid, Mr. Mercer, Julian said softly. The trust documents dictate that upon his passing, and upon presentation of the physical passbook, the entire portfolio transfers to you. There are no stipulations. There are no other beneficiaries. It is not tied up in probate. The money is yours. Today. I sat perfectly still. The heavy walls of the vault seemed to press inward. $12 million. I thought about my grueling hospital shifts. I thought about the constant anxiety of paying my electric bill. I thought about Emily carefully budgeting our groceries every Sunday. And then, a dark, heavy thought slammed into my mind. I thought about David. I pictured him at the wedding reception, his face flushed with champagne and arrogance. I pictured him holding the passbook, holding $12 million in his manicured hand, and casually dropping it into a bucket of melting ice because he was too arrogant to look inside. He had thrown away a fortune because he assumed anything touched by my grandfather was worthless. Is there any way my father... Is David Mercer listed anywhere on this account? I asked, my voice suddenly turning cold and clinical. Absolutely not, Julian confirmed quickly. Your grandfather was very explicit in the trust charter. He specifically legally firewalled this account against any claims from your parents or your brother. We have ironclad legal documentation preventing them from accessing a single cent. I reached out and touched the wrinkled plastic of the Ziploc bag. The damp, ruined paper inside wasn't trash. It wasn't just a savings account. It was power. It was a weapon forged over 40 years by a man who knew exactly what kind of monsters I was dealing with. And as I sat in that vault, staring at a number that defied comprehension, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt the slow, steady burn of a fire igniting in my chest. Sitting in that leather chair, surrounded by the smell of old paper and the absolute silence of the bank vault, my mind violently jerked backward in time. I wasn't a 32-year-old man holding a multimillion-dollar portfolio. Suddenly, I was 12 years old again, kneeling on the cold, hard oak floor of my father's study. It was Thanksgiving evening. The house was enormous, a sprawling colonial mansion in the wealthiest suburb of the city, but it always felt like a museum where nothing could be touched. David was sitting in his massive leather wingback chair by the fireplace. He held a crystal tumbler of expensive scotch in his right hand. He was staring at me. His eyes were flat, completely devoid of anything resembling paternal warmth. I was on my hands and knees, holding a rag and a bottle of wood polish. "You missed a spot, Matthew," David said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was worse. It was a soft, calculated purr. He preferred an audience for his cruelty, and he rarely needed to raise his voice to inflict pain. I scrubbed the spot on the floor harder. My knuckles were white, my arms burning from the exertion. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll get it." David had spilled his scotch on purpose. I had seen him do it. He had tilted the glass just enough to let the amber liquid pool onto the pristine wood, and then he called me in from the kitchen. The rule in the Mercer household was unspoken but absolute. Connor was the heir, and I was the help. Connor was meant to conquer the world, and I was meant to clean up the messes. Connor, who was 16 at the time, was sprawled on the velvet sofa across the room. He was playing a handheld video game, the volume turned up high. He had his heavy, muddy boots propped up directly on the glass coffee table I had spent an hour polishing that morning. He occasionally glanced down at me, snickering when I had to crawl closer to David's chair. "He's pathetic, Dad," Connor muttered, not taking his eyes off his game. "Look at him, like a little rat." "Discipline builds character, Connor," David replied, taking a slow sip of his drink. He leaned forward, casting a long shadow over me. "And Matthew needs a lot of discipline. He is soft. He is weak. We have to train the weakness out of him." I scrubbed until the rag was dry. I scrubbed until the friction burned the skin off my knuckles and tiny droplets of my own blood smeared into the grain of the oak. I didn't stop. I knew that if I stopped, the punishment would escalate. My mother, Elizabeth, walked past the open door of the study. She paused, looked at me kneeling on the floor with bleeding hands, looked at David's calm face, and then simply kept walking. She was a woman entirely consumed by maintaining her social status. Protecting her youngest son was not on her agenda. I learned early on that fighting over the inheritance of love in our house was a losing battle. There was no love, only leverage. Then the front door chimed. Grandpa Samuel had arrived. He walked into the study, carrying a box of tools he was using to fix our broken back gate. A job David refused to pay a professional for, preferring to let the old man do manual labor. Samuel stopped in the doorway. He dropped the toolbox. It hit the floor with a heavy clatter. He saw me bleeding, shivering on the floor. He saw David swirling his drink. "What in the name of God is happening here?" Samuel's voice cracked like thunder. He rushed over and grabbed me by the shoulders, pulling me up from the floor. He looked at my bloody hands, his eyes filling with a fierce, protective rage. "Are you insane, David? He's a child. He's your son." David didn't flinch. He slowly set his crystal glass down on a side table. He stood up, smoothing the front of his expensive cashmere sweater. He towered over Grandpa Samuel. "Do not raise your voice in my house, old man," David said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. "You're abusing him," Samuel yelled, stepping between me and my father. "I'm taking him out of here. I'll take him to my place." David laughed. It was the same cruel, hollow laugh I would hear 20 years later at my wedding. He stepped closer to Samuel, invading his personal space. "You'll take him? With what money? You live in a drafty cabin and smell like sawdust. You have nothing. You are nothing." David leaned in, his face inches from Samuel's. "Touch that boy again, try to take him out of this house, and I will hire the most vicious lawyer in this city. I will drag you through court. I will have you declared mentally unfit. I will put you in a state-run nursing home so fast you won't even have time to pack your heart pills. You will die in a room that smells like bleach, surrounded by strangers. Do you understand me? Samuel froze. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a terrifying realization that David wasn't bluffing. David had the money, the power, and the absolute lack of conscience required to destroy him. Samuel looked down at me, his eyes filled with agonizing defeat. He couldn't protect me without destroying himself and ultimately leaving me even more vulnerable. Go to your room, Matthew, Samuel whispered, his voice broken. I ran up the stairs and hid in my closet, listening to the silence of the massive house. That was the day I realized that money wasn't just paper. It was a weapon. It was a shield. David used his wealth to build a fortress of terror around us. He used it to threaten custody, to control every narrative, and to crush anyone who opposed him. I grew up believing I had zero value outside of what I could endure. The heavy clank of the vault door latching shut brought me violently back to the present. I opened my eyes. I was sitting in the First National Bank. I wasn't a bleeding 12-year-old boy anymore. I looked down at the paper detailing $12 million. The money wasn't just a windfall. It was the shield Grandpa Samuel had spent 40 years forging for me. And now I was the one holding the weapon. I didn't quit my job. It would have been the easy thing to do. Walk into the hospital, throw my badge on the desk, and walk out a multimillionaire. But I didn't. The money in the bank didn't magically erase the programming etched into my brain by decades of emotional abuse. I still felt like Matthew, the invisible disappointment. 2 days after the meeting in the bank vault, I was back in the emergency room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glare over the chaos. Trauma Bay 3 was a war zone. We had a patient come in with a severe arterial bleed from an industrial accident. The floor was slick, monitors were screaming, and the smell of copper and antiseptic hung heavy in the air. I was compressing the wound, my arms shaking from the exertion, sweat stinging my eyes. Dr. Nathan, the attending trauma surgeon, was barking orders. Dr. Nathan was a brilliant surgeon, but he possessed an ego that rivaled my father's. He was arrogant, condescending, and viewed the nursing staff as necessary, yet irritating background noise. Pressure. I need more pressure, you idiot, Dr. Nathan screamed, glaring at me over his surgical mask. Are you petting him or trying to save his life? Push down. I didn't argue. I didn't tell him I was already putting my entire body weight into it. I just gritted my teeth and pushed harder. Yes, doctor, I muttered. After we stabilized the patient and rolled him up to the OR, I stood at the sink, vigorously scrubbing the blood off my forearms. Dr. Nathan walked past, ripping his gloves off and throwing them in the biohazard bin. Next time, try to anticipate my needs before I have to scream at you, Matthew, he snapped. I don't have time to hold your hand. If you can't handle the pace, go work in a pediatric clinic. He didn't wait for a response. He just kept walking. I stood there, staring at the running water. A familiar, sickening feeling washed over me. The instinct to shrink, to apologize, to make myself smaller so the angry man wouldn't hurt me. It was the exact same feeling I had when David yelled at me. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. I had dark circles under my eyes. I looked exhausted and beaten down. I thought about the $12 million sitting in the Totten Trust. I had more money in liquid assets than Dr. Nathan would earn in his entire career. I could buy this hospital wing and fire him tomorrow. Yet, I was still standing here, taking his abuse, swallowing my pride, because I didn't know how to be anything else. Having power on paper didn't equate to having power in my soul. I was still terrified. I walked into the break room, a cramped, windowless closet smelling of stale coffee and burnt microwave popcorn. I slumped into a plastic chair and pulled out my phone. I had a text message from my best friend, Elijah. Elijah and I had met in college. While I was struggling through nursing school, working double shifts just to pay tuition because David refused to let me touch my own college fund, Elijah was a brilliant, eccentric data science major. He saw patterns in numbers the way a musician hears notes. He was the only person who knew the full extent of my family's toxicity. He was my most loyal ally. I had called Elijah the moment I left the bank vault. I didn't know what to do with the money, but more importantly, I didn't know what to do about David. I knew that if David ever found out about the trust, he would stop at nothing to take it. He would drag me through a messy, manufactured legal battle. He would threaten Emily. He would destroy my life to get his hands on Grandpa Samuel's final victory. I needed to know exactly what kind of enemy I was facing. I needed Elijah to look into David's finances. The text message on my screen was brief. It sent a cold shock down my spine. Get over to my apartment as soon as your shift ends. You need to see this. It's worse than we thought. I changed out of my scrubs, my mind racing. What could be worse? David was a ruthless billionaire. He owned half the commercial real estate in the city. He was terrifying because he was untouchable. What did Elijah find? I drove to Elijah's apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I walked through his door, I found him standing in the middle of his living room, completely surrounded by a chaotic fortress of printed spreadsheets, financial disclosures, and public tax records. The air in the room felt electric, charged with the static of a massive secret about to break open. Elijah didn't even say hello. He turned his laptop screen toward me. His eyes were wide, a manic energy radiating from him. "Matthew," Elijah said, his voice flat, completely devoid of its usual sarcastic humor. "Your father isn't a titan of industry. He's a ghost. The entire Mercer Empire. It doesn't exist." "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" I asked, staring at the chaotic web of red lines and highlighted numbers on Elijah's monitor. "He owns the Mercer building downtown. He owns the country club. We grew up in a mansion that looks like a castle." Elijah shook his head slowly, taking a sip from a massive mug of cold coffee. "No, Matthew. He leases the illusion of ownership. I spent the last 48 hours doing a deep forensic dive into his corporate structures. It's brilliant in a highly illegal, sociopathic kind of way. But it's falling apart." Elijah pulled a thick stack of printed papers from the table and handed them to me. "Look at the holding companies. He doesn't actually hold the deed to the downtown property. A shell corporation in Delaware holds the deed, and that corporation is heavily mortgaged against a bridge loan from a private equity firm in the Caymans. He's using the projected future revenue of properties he hasn't even built yet to pay the interest on the loans he took out 10 years ago." I stared at the spreadsheets. I was a nurse, not an accountant, but even I could recognize the terrifying pattern Elijah had highlighted. The columns of debt were staggering. There were hundreds of millions of dollars in liabilities, balanced precariously on assets that were grossly overvalued or entirely fictitious. "It's a Ponzi scheme," Elijah said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He's not building wealth. He's just moving a massive, expanding bubble of debt from one ledger to another. He takes money from new investors to pay off the old ones, skimming millions off the top to fund his lifestyle. The mansion, the cars, the country club memberships, it's all bought with stolen, borrowed money." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The invincible monster who had terrorized me my entire life was a fraud. The man who had mocked my grandfather's passbook, who had bragged about his vast fortunes while I struggled to pay for my nursing exams, was completely broke. "He's completely insolvent," Elijah continued, tapping a specific document with a red pen. "The mansion you grew up in? The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings 3 weeks ago. He's managed to keep it out of the public record by filing endless delay motions. But the clock is ticking. He's bleeding cash. The family trust he claims to manage for you and Connor? It's empty. He drained it 5 years ago. He's been moving the same $50,000 between 6 different shell accounts at the end of every month just to generate automated statements that make it look like he has liquidity." I sank onto Elijah's battered sofa. I expected to feel vindicated. I expected to feel a surge of triumph. But I just felt sick. The scale of the deception was dizzying. "Connor," I said quietly. "Does Connor know?" "Doubt it," Elijah snorted. "Your brother is too busy leasing sports cars and playing the prince to look at a ledger. But it gets worse, man. Much worse." Elijah clicked his mouse, bringing up a new window on his screen. It was a scanned document with an ominous, official-looking seal at the top. "What is that?" I asked, leaning closer to the screen. "That is a notice of deficiency," Elijah said grimly. "From the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. I found it buried in a public court filing related to one of his smaller, bankrupt subsidiaries." I read the text on the screen. The legal jargon was dense, but the implication was clear as crystal. The federal government was auditing David. They weren't just looking for unpaid taxes. They were actively investigating him for systemic, multi-decade tax fraud, money laundering, and the illegal use of offshore shell companies. "They've caught him," Elijah explained, pacing the small room. "The IRS has been building a case for years. They know about the shell companies. They know about the Cayman accounts. They are preparing a massive asset forfeiture and criminal indictment. He's not just facing bankruptcy, Matthew. He is facing federal prison. Decades of it." I stared at the seal on the document. The terror my father instilled in me suddenly made perfect sense. His arrogance, his cruelty, his desperate need to control everyone around him. It wasn't the confidence of a powerful man. It was the frantic, aggressive flailing of a drowning man trying to keep his head above water. "He needs cash," Elijah said, stopping and looking directly at me. "He needs a massive, untraceable injection of liquidity immediately. He needs millions to pay off the most aggressive creditors, to bribe officials, or to fund an escape plan before the DOJ drops the hammer. He is a cornered animal, Matthew. And cornered animals are incredibly dangerous." My phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound was so sudden it made both of us jump. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen on my screen since I walked out of my wedding. "David." I looked at Elijah. The blood rushed out of my head. "Don't answer it," Elijah whispered. "He's hunting." I stared at the vibrating phone. For 32 years, I would have answered on the first ring, my voice trembling, desperate to appease him. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was a man looking at proof of my abuser's impending destruction. And I held $12 million of armor in my bank account. I took a deep breath, swiped the screen, and put the phone on speaker, placing it on the coffee table among the spreadsheets detailing his crimes. "Hello, David," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Matthew." David's voice filled the room. It wasn't angry. It was dripping with a smooth, manufactured warmth that made my skin crawl. There was no apology for the wedding. No hesitation. "How are you, son?" I know things got a little heated at the reception. Emotions were running high. You know how weddings are. "What do you want, David?" I asked coldly. He ignored my tone. "I've been thinking about you, and about Samuel. I know his passing was hard on you, and I know he left you that old cabin up by the lake." My stomach tightened. Grandpa Samuel's cabin. It was a modest 2-bedroom wooden house on a small plot of land in upstate New York. It was worth maybe $300,000. To the billionaire David pretended to be, it was pennies. But to the desperate fraudster Elijah had just exposed, it was an unencumbered asset. It was a lifeline. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Well, I'm going to do you a favor," David said, adopting his most paternal, authoritative tone. "I've spoken to my real estate lawyer. The market up there is highly volatile right now. We need to liquidate that property quickly before it loses value. I'll handle the sale for you. I'll get you above market price, and I'll roll the proceeds directly into the family trust. I'll invest it in my new commercial project so you actually see a real return. You're a nurse, Matthew. Your salary is, well, it is what it is. You don't know the first thing about property taxes, maintenance, or capital gains. I'm trying to protect you from a massive headache." I looked at Elijah. Elijah was silently mouthing the word liar. David didn't want to invest the money. He wanted to seize the deed, sell the cabin, and funnel the cash into his black hole of debt. He was trying to rob me blind while pretending to be my savior. "How did you even know about the cabin?" I asked. "The will had been private. Your Uncle Robert mentioned it," David said casually. "We had lunch yesterday. He's very worried about your financial stability, Matthew. We all are. I closed my eyes. Uncle Robert. The man who had patted my back at the funeral, who always claimed to be the nice uncle, who told me he hated how David treated me. He was a spy. He was feeding David information to stay in his good graces. Another betrayal. Another reminder that, in this family, loyalty was just a commodity to be traded. I appreciate the offer, David, I said, my voice hardening. But I'm not selling the cabin. It's the only thing Grandpa left me. I'm keeping it. The line went completely dead silent. The manufactured warmth vanished in a millisecond. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. Matthew, David said. His voice dropped an octave. It was the voice he used in the study when I was 12. The voice that preceded violence. You are not thinking clearly. I am telling you what we are going to do. And I am telling you no, I replied. I felt a strange thrill run through my veins. The first time I had ever defied him. The mask completely slipped. The predator bared its teeth. You listen to me, you ungrateful little piece of trash. David snarled through the speaker. The venom in his voice was palpable. That old man was mentally incompetent the day he signed that deed over to you. His brain was rotting. I have 2 medical experts on retainer ready to testify that he was suffering from advanced dementia. My heart hammered against my ribs. That's a lie. He was perfectly sharp. It doesn't matter what the truth is. David roared. It matters what I can prove in a courtroom. I have sworn affidavits from Uncle Robert and others stating that you isolated Samuel. That you manipulated a senile geriatric into signing over family assets to yourself because you're a failure who can't survive on a nurse's salary. I stared at the phone, horrified by the sheer depth of his malice. He was threatening to drag my grandfather's name through the mud, to paint me as an abuser. If you do not sign a power of attorney over to my lawyer by Friday morning, David continued, his voice a relentless, pounding hammer, I will sue you for elder abuse. I will file an injunction against the property. I will drag you through probate court for the next 10 years. I will make sure the legal fees completely bankrupt you. I will call the hospital board and tell them you are under investigation for exploiting the elderly. You will lose your license, Matthew. You will lose everything. Do you understand me? You are out of your depth. Sign the papers or I will destroy you. He didn't wait for an answer. The line clicked dead. The silence in Elijah's apartment was deafening. I felt like the floor had opened up and swallowed me. The panic was absolute. The 12-year-old boy inside me was screaming in terror. David was going to take everything. He was going to ruin my career, destroy my marriage, and taint the only pure memory I had of my grandfather. This was rock bottom. I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of a monster who held all the cards. I buried my face in my hands, a wave of despair crashing over me. He's going to do it, I choked out. He's going to ruin me for a $300,000 cabin. Elijah walked over and slammed his hand down on the table, rattling the coffee mugs. The sharp noise snapped me out of my spiral. No, he isn't, Elijah said, his voice fierce. Look at me, Matthew. Look at the paper. I looked up. Elijah was pointing at the IRS notice of deficiency. He is desperate, Elijah said, his eyes burning with intensity. This threat, this lawsuit, takes time. Takes months to file, years to litigate. He doesn't have years. He doesn't even have weeks. The IRS is breathing down his neck right now. He's bluffing to scare you into handing over a quick asset. He is a paper tiger. I stared at the IRS document. The red seal. The words criminal investigation. A profound, violent shift occurred inside my mind. The terror began to recede, replaced by something cold, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. I looked at the spreadsheets detailing his fake empire. I looked at the phone where he had just threatened my life. I thought about the bleeding on the hardwood floor. I thought about the passbook in the ice bucket. I thought about the $12 million sitting in a vault in Boston, an impenetrable shield of real power. David thought he was bullying a helpless, invisible son. He didn't realize he had just handed the executioner a map to his own gallows. I stood up, The exhaustion from my 14-hour shift vanished, replaced by pure adrenaline. He wants money, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He's willing to commit perjury, destroy his own son, and defame a dead man for $300,000. Yes, Elijah said slowly, watching the change in my demeanor. 300,000 is a drop in the bucket, I said, pacing the room. My mind was moving a million miles an hour. It won't save him from the IRS. It'll just delay the inevitable by a few days. He needs a massive injection of cash. He needs a miracle. I stopped and looked at Elijah. What if I give him one? Elijah frowned, confused. Give him what? A miracle, I repeated. A cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. It wasn't my smile. It was a smile inherited from a family of predators, finally being used against them. What happens to a man who is dying of thirst in the desert if you suddenly show him an oasis? He doesn't check to see if the water is poisoned. He just drinks. Matthew, what are you talking about? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the Ziploc bag. I pulled out the water-stained passbook and tossed it onto the table, right on top of David's fraudulent tax returns. David threw this away, I said. He thought it was trash. He doesn't know there is $12 million sitting in a Totten trust with my name on it. Elijah's jaw literally dropped. He stared at the blue book, then up at me. 12 million? Are you serious? Dead serious, I said. It's liquid. It's clean. It's exactly what David needs to clear his immediate debts and flee, or at least try to fight the federal government. Elijah shook his head frantically. No, Matthew. Absolutely not. You cannot give him that money. It's yours. If you transfer that to him, it's gone forever. He'll sink it into his black hole and you'll never see a dime. I have no intention of giving him a single cent, I said, my voice turning to ice. I am going to use it as bait. I am going to show the starving wolf a mountain of meat, and I am going to let him step right into the steel trap. I looked at the chaotic mess of documents on the table. The plan was forming perfectly in my head. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it was the only way to surgically excise the cancer of my father from my life forever. Elijah, I said, leaning over the table, I need you to help me build a bomb, a legal, financial bomb, and I need to hand the detonator directly to David. I waited exactly 24 hours before calling him back. Silence is a powerful weapon against a narcissist. It lets their paranoia breed. I knew David would be pacing his office, checking his phone, wondering if his threats had worked, wondering if I had hired a lawyer. By the time I finally dialed his number, I was ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I didn't summon the confident man who had walked out of the bank vault in Boston. I dug deep into the darkest corners of my trauma. I summoned the terrified 12-year-old boy, the invisible nurse who took abuse without complaint. I hunched my shoulders, taking quick, shallow breaths to make my voice sound tight and panicked. I hit call. He picked up on the first ring. Have you signed the transfer papers for the cabin? David barked. No greeting, just demands. Dad, I whispered. I let my voice tremble violently. Dad, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hung up. Please don't sue me. You brought this on yourself, Matthew, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. But the sharp edge was gone. He heard the fear in my voice, and it fed his ego. He thought he had won. I told you I am doing this for your own good. Now, when are you signing the deed? It's not about the cabin. I stammered, pitching my voice to the perfect frequency of naive, overwhelming panic. I went to the bank yesterday. About the passbook. The one Grandpa gave me at the wedding. The one you threw in the ice. The line went dead silent. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. The predator was evaluating new information. What about it? He asked cautiously. It wasn't empty, Dad. I choked out, forcing a fake sob into my throat. It's a trust fund. From 1982. He invested in tech stocks. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. How much? The greed leaked through the phone speaker like black oil. He tried to sound detached, but I could hear the desperate hunger in his breath. 12 million, I cried. $12,400,000. I heard a sharp intake of breath, the sound of a drowning man seeing a life raft. But Dad, I don't know what to do. I escalated the panic, talking rapidly. The bank manager started talking about capital gains taxes and federal reporting requirements and sudden wealth audits. He said the IRS tracks transfers over $10,000. If the government finds out I have this, they'll take half of it in taxes. They might audit my nurse's salary. I can't handle this. I don't know how to hide it. I'm terrified they're going to freeze it. It was the perfect bait. I handed him exactly what he believed about me. That I was weak, stupid, entirely incapable of handling power, and desperate for his approval. And more importantly, I handed him exactly what he needed. A massive, untraceable injection of liquidity to cover his own colossal crimes. Matthew, listen to me very carefully, David said. His voice transformed instantly. The bully vanished. Suddenly, he was the calm, authoritative savior. It was chilling how quickly he could switch masks. Do not speak to anyone at the bank. Do not hire a lawyer. They will just steal your money. But what do? I whined. You bring the trust documents to me, he commanded smoothly. I have armies of accountants. I have offshore shelters. I can pull that 12 million under the umbrella of the Mercer Family Trust. We can classify it as a pre-existing corporate asset. It is complicated financial engineering, Matthew, you wouldn't understand it, but I can make your tax liability completely disappear. I can protect this money for you. Protect me. He wanted to swallow my inheritance whole, to plug the holes in his sinking ship, and leave me with nothing. Can you really do that? I asked, sounding awestruck. I do it every day, he lied effortlessly. But we have to move fast before the bank reports the balance to the IRS. I have the Man of the Year charity gala on Saturday night at the Fairmont. It's perfect. Bring the documents to my VIP suite before the speeches. We'll sign the transfer of authority there. I'll even announce the expansion of the family fund on stage. It'll make the influx of cash look completely legitimate to any regulators watching. I am going to save you, son. He wanted the audience. He couldn't help himself. He wanted the glory of announcing a $12 million windfall as his own brilliant business maneuvering while secretly using it to save himself from federal prison. Okay, Dad, I whispered. Thank you. Thank you for fixing this. That's what family is for, he said, and hung up. I lowered the phone. I looked across the room at Elijah. The fake tears were gone. My face was a mask of cold stone. He took the bait, I said. Elijah nodded slowly, a dark grin spreading across his face. Then we better get to work. We have a bomb to build. We didn't hire a lawyer. We hired Cameron. Cameron was a friend of Elijah's, a brilliant graphic designer who specialized in corporate branding and document recreation for movie props. We met him in a dimly lit coffee shop downtown, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside the envelope were copies of standard legal transfer forms from the First National Bank, along with the corporate letterhead of David's primary holding company. I need a flawless replication, I told Cameron, tapping the papers. Same font, same paper weight, same watermarks. It needs to look exactly like a standard transfer of asset authority document. The kind of document a CEO signs 50 times a day without looking. Cameron inspected the papers through thick glasses. Easy enough. What's the catch? The catch is the fine print, Elijah said, pulling out a flash drive. The headers and the signature lines will look like a transfer of $12 million into the Mercer Family Trust. But the body paragraphs, the legal definitions, they are entirely different. Elijah plugged the drive into Cameron's laptop and opened a text file. It was dense, impenetrable legalese. What is this? Cameron asked. It is an affidavit of sole liability, I explained, tracing the words on the screen. David thinks he is signing a document accepting control of my money. But this text actually states that the signatory, David, acknowledges and retroactively accepts sole, exclusive financial and criminal responsibility for a specific list of 22 offshore shell companies. I handed Cameron a piece of paper listing the exact companies Elijah had found in the IRS deficiency notice. If he signs this, Elijah added, his eyes gleaming, he is legally confessing to 20 years of tax fraud, money laundering, and wire fraud. He is telling the federal government, in writing with his own signature, that he alone orchestrated the entire Ponzi scheme. Cameron let out a low whistle. That is diabolical. But will a fake document hold up in court? It doesn't have to hold up in a 10-year trial, I said smoothly. It just has to be credible enough to give the Department of Justice the probable cause they need to execute an immediate, catastrophic seizure of assets. The IRS is already circling him. They are just waiting for a smoking gun to prove he controlled the shell companies. We are going to hand-deliver the gun, still smoking, with his fingerprints all over it. Cameron went to work. For 2 days, Elijah and I practically lived in the coffee shop, reviewing drafts. The final product was a masterpiece. It was a thick, impressive-looking presentation folder bound in blue leather. Inside were 10 pages of dense text. The front page blared, Authorization of Asset Transfer and Trust Integration. The signature line at the back clearly read, Acknowledged and accepted by David Mercer, sole trustee. But buried in paragraphs 4 through 9, camouflaged by complex tax codes and convoluted syntax, was the confession. David was a man who believed entirely in his own dominance. He believed I was a pathetic, terrified child begging for his help. He would never, in a million years, suspect that I had the intelligence or the courage to lay a trap. He wouldn't read the document. He would only see the $12 million. He would only see his salvation. On Friday night, I stood in my apartment, staring at the blue folder resting on my kitchen counter. It looked innocuous, just paper and ink, but it was the culmination of 30 years of pain, distilled into a single weapon. I picked up my phone and sent a text to the encrypted portal Elijah had set up, directly linked to an anonymous whistleblower drop at the Department of Justice. We had already uploaded the preliminary evidence Elijah had gathered. They were waiting for the final piece. The target will provide signed confirmation tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Stand by. I put the phone down. The storm was coming. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. I was the one bringing the lightning. The Man of the Year charity gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza in downtown Boston. It is the kind of venue that drips with old money and aggressive ambition. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden light over hundreds of the city's most powerful people. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos navigated the crowded floor, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and caviar. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, expensive floral arrangements, and the heavy, undeniable stench of artificial importance. This was David's element. This was the theater where he played his favorite role, the benevolent king of industry. I arrived at exactly 7:55 in the evening. I did not walk through the back service doors, and I was not wearing the cheap, ill-fitting clothes my father always preferred me in so I would blend into the background. I was wearing a structured, charcoal gray bespoke suit that Elijah had helped me pick out. It was tailored to perfection, hugging my shoulders and giving me a silhouette of absolute authority. The fabric alone cost more than I made in 3 months on my nurse's salary. I didn't buy it to show off. I bought it as armor. Tonight, I was not the invisible disappointment. I was the executioner. I walked right through the main double doors, handing my invitation to the attendant. I moved through the crowd, not around it. The rich and powerful parted slightly as I walked, sensing a shift in the gravity of the room. I kept my face entirely neutral. My heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm against my ribs. I felt an intense, terrifying clarity. Near the main bar, I spotted my older brother, Connor. He was surrounded by 3 young women in glittering dresses, laughing entirely too loudly. He was holding a glass of amber liquid in one hand and casually tossing a Porsche key fob in the other, making sure the golden crest caught the light. He was playing the role of the wealthy heir to a kingdom that did not exist. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely no resentment. I only felt a cold, clinical pity. He was a hollow man standing on a trapdoor, bragging about the rope around his neck. He didn't even notice me walk past. He was too busy drowning in his own reflection. At the front of the enormous room, elevated on a carpeted stage, stood David. He was flanked by 2 state senators and the CEO of a major tech firm. David looked utterly radiant. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. His silver hair was perfectly swept back. He was shaking hands, flashing his brilliant, predatory smile for the photographers. It was the radiant glow of a man who firmly believed he had just pulled off the financial heist of the century. He thought he had outsmarted the federal government, outsmarted the banks, and completely dominated his weak, pathetic son. He glanced over the crowd and his eyes locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, his smile froze. He took in the expensive suit, my posture, the absolute lack of fear in my expression. But his arrogance quickly overrode his instinct. He excused himself from the senators, whispering a joke that made them chuckle, and walked down the velvet-lined stairs to meet me near a side alcove, away from the flashing cameras. "You're late," David hissed through his perfectly white teeth. He kept the pleasant smile plastered on his face for the benefit of anyone watching, but his eyes were hard and frantic. He grabbed my elbow, his grip tight and painful, and steered me toward the heavy oak doors of the VIP holding suite just off the main ballroom. "Get inside." The VIP suite was soundproofed and smelled of rich leather and expensive cigars. The roar of the gala was instantly cut off as the heavy door clicked shut behind us. We were alone. David didn't waste a single second on pleasantries. The facade dropped completely. The desperation he had been hiding from the senators bled out into the room. His hands were actually trembling slightly as he turned to face me. The greed radiating off him was a physical force, vibrating like heat rising off black asphalt in the summer. "Do you have it?" he demanded, his voice a harsh rasp. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket. I pulled out the thick, blue leather presentation folder Cameron had meticulously crafted. I held it out. "I have it, Dad, just like you asked." He snatched the folder from my hands with the speed of a starving animal. He walked over to the mahogany desk in the center of the room and threw it open. "Is it all here? The transfer authorizations? The power of attorney?" "It is all there," I said, pitching my voice to sound slightly nervous, playing the role one last time. "It puts the entire $12 million under the direct control of the Mercer Family Trust. You just need to sign the back page as the sole trustee to legally accept the assets. Once you sign, the bank releases the funds tomorrow morning." David flipped frantically to the last page. He didn't read the clauses. He didn't check the legal definitions. He didn't read the fine print detailing the 22 offshore shell companies. He just saw the thick black line at the bottom with his name printed underneath. A smart man would have paused. A smart man would have asked why the document was titled Affidavit of Historical Management and Sole Liability, instead of a standard asset transfer. A smart man would have wondered why the dates listed in the dense paragraphs went back 20 years, retroactively linking him to every single fraudulent transaction the IRS was currently investigating. But David was not a smart man. He was an arrogant man. He was a narcissist who believed so completely in his own intellectual dominance that he could not even conceive of a universe where I was the threat. I was his punching bag. Punching bags do not build bombs. He pulled a heavy gold Montblanc pen from his breast pocket. He clicked it open. "You did the right thing, Matthew," he said, not even looking up at me. "You're finally learning how the real world works. I'll make sure you get a nice little allowance out of this once the taxes are settled." He leaned over the desk. He pressed the gold nib of the pen to the crisp white paper. And with a grand, sweeping flourish, David Mercer signed his full legal name. He didn't just sign a piece of paper. He signed his own death warrant. He legally bound himself to decades of massive financial crimes, handing the federal government the exact written confession they needed to bypass years of litigation and move straight to asset seizure and arrest. He snapped the folder shut and handed it back to me, completely dismissive. He was already turning his attention to the mirror on the wall, adjusting his bow tie, preparing to step back into the spotlight. "Keep that safe," he ordered, checking his reflection. "Take it directly to my lawyer's office first thing Monday morning. Now go find a seat in the back by the kitchen doors. I have an announcement to make, and I don't want you hovering around the VIP tables." He bounded out the door, eager to claim his stolen glory. I stood alone in the quiet VIP suite. I listened to his footsteps fading down the carpeted hallway. My hands were perfectly steady. I walked over to the mahogany desk, opened the blue leather folder, and turned to the final page. The ink from his signature was still slightly wet, catching the light from the brass lamp on the desk. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the encrypted messaging application Elijah had installed. I framed the document perfectly in the camera lens, ensuring the title of the affidavit, the list of shell companies, and David's sprawling signature were entirely in focus. I took the picture. The artificial shutter click sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I typed a 2-word message to Elijah. "It's done." I hit send. A small green checkmark appeared. The image was transmitted 3 miles away to Elijah's apartment. I knew exactly what was happening on his end. Elijah was sitting at his multi-monitor setup, waiting. He received the image, immediately attached it to the finalized, comprehensive whistleblower complaint we had spent days preparing, and uploaded the entire massive data packet directly into the Department of Justice's secure portal. My phone buzzed in my hand 10 seconds later. Elijah's reply flashed on the screen. "Upload complete." The DOJ system flagged it as Priority 1 due to the active IRS CID case numbers we tagged. "It is out of our hands now. The avalanche has started." I closed the blue folder and tucked it under my arm. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air. For the first time in 32 years, the crushing, suffocating weight I had carried in my chest was gone. The invisible chains were shattered. I opened the heavy oak door and walked back out into the bright, chaotic energy of the grand ballroom. I didn't go to the back by the kitchen doors. I walked right to the center of the room, standing near the main camera crews, and folded my arms. I wanted a front row seat to the end of the empire. The room quieted down as the orchestral music faded. The main spotlight hit the stage, illuminating David in a circle of brilliant white light. The crowd of 500 elites turned their attention forward, their champagne glasses catching the gleam of the chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and friends," David began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. He was a master orator, projecting total confidence. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate philanthropy. We are here to celebrate giving back to the city that has given us all so much." Polite applause rippled through the room. I watched his face. He was drinking it in. He was addicted to the admiration. "But tonight is not just about charity," David continued, pacing the stage slowly, owning the space. "It is about legacy. The Mercer family has always stood for growth, stability, and looking toward the future. And that is why, tonight, I am incredibly proud to announce a historic expansion of our corporate initiatives." He paused for dramatic effect. He looked out over the crowd, a smug, victorious smile playing on his lips. He thought he was untouchable. Effective immediately, the Mercer Family Trust is injecting $12 million in fresh, liquid capital directly into the downtown development sector. The crowd erupted into genuine cheers. $12 million was a massive sum, even for this room. People were clapping, nodding in respect. The state senators on the stage clapped him on the back. David raised his hands, basking in the glory, confessing to the ownership of stolen funds in real time, right in front of 500 witnesses and half a dozen local news cameras. He thought he was unveiling his legacy. He was actually reading his own Miranda rights. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I pulled it out. "Elijah, look at the screen." I looked up. Behind David, the massive 60-foot LED screen had been displaying the elegant gold logo of the Mercer Foundation. Suddenly, the gold logo flickered. It glitched, cutting to black for a split second. When the screen illuminated again, the Mercer logo was gone. It was replaced by a massive, high-definition image of the Department of Justice seal. Stamped across the federal seal in bold, glaring red letters were the words, Federal Asset Seizure in Progress. Case 8842. All accounts frozen. The applause in the ballroom didn't fade out. It collapsed instantly. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The silence was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. 500 people stared at the screen in complete shock. David, noticing the sudden silence and the horrified expressions of the people in the front row, turned around. He looked up at the massive LED screen. I watched his face as his brain tried to process the impossible image. He didn't look afraid at first. He looked confused. His narcissism was so deeply ingrained that his mind simply rejected a reality that did not match his carefully constructed script. He squinted at the red letters, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. That was his fatal flaw. Not ignorance, but supreme entitlement. He never believed that someone he had dismissed as a pathetic, invisible piece of trash could build a trap big enough to hold him. Before David could say a word, the heavy double doors at the back of the grand ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. Federal agents. Nobody move. 6 agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, wearing tactical vests over their suits, swept down the center aisle. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. The crowd of billionaires and politicians panicked, scattering like insects when a light is turned on, pushing against tables and spilling champagne. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man named Lincoln, marched directly up the stage steps. He didn't hesitate. He didn't care about the cameras or the wealth in the room. David Mercer, Agent Lincoln's voice cut through the rising chaos of the ballroom. Step away from the podium and keep your hands where I can see them. David clutched the microphone stand, his knuckles turning white. His face was the color of ash. The illusion was shattering into a million pieces. What is the meaning of this? Do you have any idea who I am? I am a personal friend of the governor. We know exactly who you are, Mr. Mercer. Agent Lincoln replied coldly, stepping within striking distance. You are the sole trustee who just signed a legally binding affidavit accepting full criminal and financial responsibility for 20 years of unreported offshore shell accounts and wire fraud. He saw the bespoke suit. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I stood in the ballroom watching the federal agents drag David through the lobby doors. As I pushed the heavy oak door open, a hand grabbed my shoulder and violently threw me into the room. The door slammed shut behind me, and the lock clicked. I stumbled, catching my balance on the mahogany desk. I looked up. Standing between me and the door was my brother, Connor. He looked entirely unhinged. His designer tie was torn open. His hair was a messy nest of sweat and gel, and his face was flushed a deep, violent purple. He was panting heavily, his eyes wild and darting around the room. The golden child had just watched his entire kingdom burn to the ground on live television, and the terrifying reality of his new existence was setting in. There would be no trust fund. There would be no inheritance. There would be no sports cars. He was going to have to work, or he was going to go to prison alongside his father. You ruined everything, Connor hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. What did you do, Matthew? What the hell did you do? The feds just seized the accounts. My cards are declining. You destroyed our family. I didn't destroy anything, Connor, I said, my voice eerily calm. I stood up straight, smoothing my jacket. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He was just a bully without his backup. It was already ruined. The money never existed. It was all a Ponzi scheme. Dad has been bankrupt for years. He built this whole life on stolen money. And you were too lazy to ever ask where it came from. Shut up, Connor screamed. He grabbed a large, serrated steak knife from a silver catering tray left on a side table. He pointed it at my chest, his hand shaking violently. This wasn't corporate strategy anymore. This wasn't financial engineering. This was raw animal instinct. This was the terrifying moment when the illusion of family completely collapses. The money evaporates, and desperation shows its teeth. Connor had nothing left to lose, and his fragile ego demanded someone to punish. He lunged at me, sweeping the knife in a wild, untrained arc toward my face. Before I could even react, the door to the VIP suite flew open so hard the wood splintered around the lock. Elijah stepped into the room. He had driven over the second the upload was complete to make sure I got out safely. Elijah didn't hesitate. As Connor swung the knife, Elijah stepped in, grabbing Connor's wrist with both hands. He twisted his body, using Connor's own momentum against him, and snapped his arm downward over his knee. A sickening crack echoed in the room. Connor let out a high-pitched, agonizing wail. The steak knife clattered harmlessly across the marble floor. Connor collapsed to his knees, clutching his broken arm against his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Elijah stood over him, breathing heavily, adjusting his glasses. He looked at me. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, looking down at my brother. Hotel security and 2 Boston police officers rushed into the room seconds later, weapons drawn. They saw Connor on the floor, the knife nearby, and immediately moved to secure him. I watched the officers pull Connor to his feet. He was weeping hysterically, the tears mixing with sweat and snot on his face. He looked at me, begging for help, begging for the brotherly bond he had spent 30 years mocking and exploiting. He was crying, but not from the physical pain of his broken arm. He was crying from irrelevance. He was crying because he finally realized he was absolutely nothing. I turned my back on him and walked out of the suite with Elijah. The night air outside the hotel had never felt so clean. That was 3 weeks ago. The fallout was biblical. The collapse of the Mercer Empire dominated the local and national news cycles for days. It turned out, Elijah and I had only scratched the surface of David's crimes. When the federal investigators cracked open the shell companies I had forced David to legally claim, they found a rat king of fraud, bribery, and embezzlement that spanned 2 decades. David was indicted on 47 counts of federal financial crimes. His team of expensive defense lawyers abandoned him the moment they realized the asset freeze meant they weren't going to get paid. He was assigned a public defender. At his arraignment, the federal judge reviewed the flight risk and the sheer scale of the stolen funds. David Mercer was denied bail. He was sent directly to a federal detention center to await trial, stripped of his bespoke suits and forced to wear a standard orange jumpsuit. The bank foreclosed on the Newport mansion almost immediately. The luxury cars were towed away on flatbeds. My mother, Elizabeth, who had spent her entire life carefully curating her social status and turning a blind eye to my father's abuse, was suddenly locked out of the country club. The federal asset seizure left her with nothing but the clothes in her closet. Last I heard, she was frantically trying to pawn her remaining jewelry to afford rent on a tiny, 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She hasn't called me. She doesn't have my new number, and I wouldn't answer even if she did. As for Connor, his broken arm healed, but his ego did not. Facing accessory charges for signing his name on several fraudulent corporate documents David had pushed in front of him over the years, Connor panicked. He didn't have the stomach for a fight. He took a brutal plea deal. He avoided federal prison, but he was slapped with 5 years of strict probation, massive restitution fines, and 500 hours of community service. The golden child, the supposed heir to the kingdom, now spends his weekends wearing an orange safety vest, picking up trash along the interstate highway. There is no inheritance waiting for him. Only decades of minimum wage work to pay off his debts. The empire was entirely liquidated. The air was finally clear. Despite the $12 million sitting safely in the Totten Trust, I did not quit my job. I didn't buy a Lamborghini. I didn't buy a mansion. I went back to work. A few days after the gala, I was back in the emergency room. The chaotic symphony of the trauma bays surrounded me. We were working on a critical patient, stabilizing a shattered femur. Dr. Nathan, the arrogant attending surgeon, was running the room. He was stressed, sweating, and as usual, looking for someone to blame for the pressure he felt. I handed him a surgical clamp. He fumbled it, and it clattered to the sterile tray. Instead of taking responsibility, he snapped his head toward me, his eyes flaring with that familiar, bullying rage. "Are you entirely incompetent, Matthew?" Dr. Nathan shouted, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. "I asked for the clamp, not for you to throw it at me. Pay attention or get the hell out of my trauma bay. You are useless." For 32 years, that tone of voice would have paralyzed me. I would have dropped my gaze, mumbled a frantic apology, and let the poison seep into my skin. I would have shrunk down to the size of a 12-year-old boy scrubbing a hardwood floor. But not today. I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I stopped what I was doing. I stood up to my full height, squaring my shoulders. I looked directly into Dr. Nathan's eyes, my expression completely flat, devoid of any fear or intimidation. The trauma bay went dead silent. The other nurses stared at me in shock. "Do not speak to me like that again, doctor," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a heavy, unyielding gravity. It was the voice of a man who had destroyed a monster 10 times his size. Dr. Nathan blinked, utterly stunned by the defiance. "Excuse me? Are you talking back to me?" "I am stating a boundary," I replied, holding his gaze without flinching. "I am a professional, and I am doing my job correctly. If you drop an instrument, that is your error. You will treat me, and every other nurse in this room, with professional respect. If you ever raise your voice at me again to cover your own mistakes, I will immediately leave this bay. I will walk straight to the hospital administrator's office, and I will file a formal grievance against you for workplace harassment. Do you understand me?" Dr. Nathan opened his mouth to yell, but the words died in his throat. He looked at my eyes. He saw the absolute certainty there. He saw that I was not bluffing. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The bully realized his tactics no longer worked. He swallowed hard, looked down at the surgical tray, and cleared his throat. "Noted. Pass me another clamp, please." I handed him the clamp. I felt a profound, incredible warmth spread through my chest. The $12 million in the bank didn't give me that strength. It had given me the opportunity to fight David, yes. But standing up for myself in that hospital room, that came from inside. The money hadn't healed me. Defeating my fear had healed me. I was no longer the invisible son. I was Matthew. This morning, the air in upstate New York smells like pine needles, wet earth, and fresh coffee. I am sitting on the wooden porch of Grandpa Samuel's cabin, the cabin that David tried to steal. I didn't sell it. Instead, I used a small fraction of the trust money to fix the roof, replace the rotting floorboards, and clear the overgrown ivy. I painted the trim, fixed the plumbing, and made it a home. It is quiet here, the kind of quiet that lets your soul finally rest. Elijah is sitting in the rocking chair next to me, typing away on his laptop, monitoring the final legal wrap-ups of the DOJ case. He's officially my financial advisor now, though mostly he's just my brother. The real kind. In my hands, I hold a printed copy of the Affidavit of Sole Liability, the fake document that brought down an empire. I look at David's sprawling signature at the bottom. It feels like a relic from a past life. I strike a match against the porch railing. I hold the flame to the corner of the paper. I watch the fire catch, consuming the legal jargon, the fake shell companies, and finally my father's name. I drop the burning paper into an old cast-iron fire pit on the porch and watch it turn to gray ash. I don't need the document anymore. The federal government has everything they need. The paper was just a physical manifestation of the fear I used to carry, and I refuse to carry it any longer. So, Elijah says, closing his laptop and looking out at the calm water of the lake. The trust transfer is fully complete. The taxes are paid. The money is sitting in a heavily diversified, low-risk portfolio. It's all yours, man. What do you actually want to do with $12 million? I take a sip of my coffee. I listen to the wind rustling through the pine trees. Nothing, I say, and I mean it. Let it grow. Let it compound, just like Grandpa Samuel wanted. I look at the ash in the fire pit. I finally understand the greatest lesson my grandfather left me. He didn't leave me money so I could buy sports cars or mansions. He didn't leave it to me so I could wield power over other people the way David did. Money isn't power. It's protection. It is a shield against the cruelty of the world. It is the ability to walk away from toxic people without fearing starvation. It is the freedom to work as a nurse because I want to help people, not because I am trapped by a salary. My father threw that passbook into the ice because he believed wealth was only valuable if it was loud, aggressive, and used to crush others. He missed the point entirely. True wealth is the quiet confidence of knowing you are safe. Family isn't blood. Blood is just an accident of biology. Blood is what gives a man the legal right to scream at a 12-year-old boy on a hardwood floor. Real family is who stands with you when the vault door opens. It's the grandfather who secretly builds a fortress for you over 40 years. It's the friend who breaks a knife-wielding hand to keep you safe. It's the wife who walks out of a wedding reception without asking questions because she trusts you completely. I am 32 years old. I am an emergency room nurse. I drive a Honda Civic. And for the first time in my entire life, I am exactly where I belong. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy one, and it took a lot of turns I never could have predicted when I was just a kid scrubbing floors. It's not easy to lay out the darkest parts of your family history for the world to see, but keeping secrets is what gave my father his power in the first place. Bringing it into the light took that power away. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Whether you're dealing with a toxic family member, an overbearing boss, or just feeling like you're invisible in your own life, I want you to know that you are not powerless. The strength to stand up doesn't come from a bank account. It comes from deciding that you are worth protecting. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone you were supposed to trust, or walk away from a relationship that was destroying you? I read every single comment, and I would be honored to hear how you found your own strength. And now, for a little tradition we have here. If you are hearing my voice right now, it means you stayed with me through the pain, the planning, and the final victory. You are part of the core community here. I call you the 1% Club, the incredibly rare, awesome group of people who actually watch videos until the very last second. If you made it this far, do me a huge favor. Go to the comments right now and type the letter W. Just a single W. It stands for winner. It's our secret code. When I see those W's in the comments, it tells me that my story connected with the right people, the people who understand what it means to fight back and win your peace. If my journey brought you any value, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm show this video to others who might need to hear it today. And if you haven't already, hit follow or subscribe. We are building a community of survivors here, and I have so many more stories and lessons I want to share with you all. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone tell you that your worth is found in their approval. Take care.